Did your family have favorites? If so, were you the favorite or someone else?
Brunch was supposed to be light. Mimosas, egg whites, passive-aggressive compliments, and that polished fake warmth we'd all mastered by now. I showed up 10 minutes late on purpose, like always, because if you arrive first, you get caught in that awkward pre-show where you have to pretend you're happy to be there. But I wasn't. I never am. Not when it's the three of us. Me, my sister Emily, and our mother, Janet, the holy trinity of denial, dressed in pastels and smiling like none of us were ever in therapy. The restaurant was one of those places with reclaimed wood and overpriced pancakes, where you sit elbow to elbow with strangers who pretend not to listen, but absolutely are. Emily was already there, wearing that navy cardigan she always wears when she's stressed. It was warm out, too warm for layers, but Emily never dressed for weather. She dressed for control. She kissed me on the cheek like we hadn't argued via text the night before about who was bringing Mom her new blood pressure meds. And then there she was, Janet, sweeping in with that beige trench coat that made her look like a suburban detective and not a 70-year-old woman who'd spent her whole life avoiding the truth and perfecting the art of emotional sniping. She sat down with a loud exhale, like the mere act of being with her daughters was a burden. She didn't say hello. She never did. She just looked at me, tilted her head slightly like she was sizing up a car she never liked, and said, "You're pale. You're not sick again, are you?" And I smiled, tight and fake, and replied, "Nope. Just not wearing makeup like someone who still thinks it matters." Emily gave me that look, the one she gives when she wants me to behave, like I'm the dog who might bite if poked too many times. The waiter came, we ordered, and for a few blessed minutes, there was peace. Emily talked about her twins, how one of them had been caught stealing gum, and how proud she was that he confessed right away. Janet nodded with approval, saying, "See? That's parenting. You set the example, and they follow." And then she looked at me, like I wasn't part of that equation, like my barren uterus and quiet apartment somehow excluded me from the realm of responsibility. I bit into my toast so I wouldn't say something I'd regret. But the thing is, I usually don't regret what I say. I regret what I hold back. And then it came. Like a needle jabbed under the skin. Soft. Quick. Deliberate. She reached for her coffee, stirring it in that slow, circular way she always did when she was about to land a blow, and said, "You were always the difficult one." Just like that. No context. No smirk. Just casual cruelty, tossed like sugar into a bitter cup. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I just blinked once and looked out the window, pretending I hadn't heard her. But I had. Of course I had. That phrase had followed me my entire life, like a watermark pressed into every choice I made. Difficult. Like I was a puzzle missing a piece. Like being the one who spoke up, asked questions, refused to play nice meant I was defective. Emily shifted in her seat, cleared her throat, and tried to change the subject, something about new shoes, but the air had already changed. You could feel it. The tension, like heat rising from asphalt. Janet smiled at her coffee like she'd done something noble. She had no idea what she'd just triggered. Or maybe she did. Maybe she wanted a reaction. But that day, for once, I didn't give her the satisfaction. I let it hang there, between us, like a smoke alarm no one bothered to turn off. After the check came, I left cash on the table, stood up, and kissed Emily on the cheek again. I didn't say goodbye to Janet. I just walked out into the sun and breathed like I hadn't in years. Not deep, not free, but steady. And then I went home. I cleaned my apartment. I watered my dying plants. I opened the old chest in my bedroom, the one with the journals I kept during the months after high school when everything went sideways and no one ever talked about it. The one that Emily once told me to burn for closure. But I never did, because part of me always knew closure wasn't real. It was just another word for burying things alive. That night, around 10, I was curled up on my couch watching reruns of some show I'd seen 100 times when my phone buzzed. Emily. Her name lit up my screen like a warning flare. I hesitated, but answered. Her voice came through in a whisper shriek. "Rachel? What did you do?" I sat up, heart starting to race, not because I was guilty, but because of how frantic she sounded. She's freaking out, she said, pacing the living room, tearing through boxes like she's looking for something. She won't say what. She won't calm down. She keeps saying that you remember. I stayed quiet for a long second, long enough that she asked Rachel. And all I said was, maybe she's finally telling the truth to herself. Emily was silent. I could hear the panic in her breathing. I could hear Janet's voice in the background, yelling something muffled and shrill. I ended the call. Not rudely. Just ended it. Then I got up, walked to the closet, and pulled down a dusty shoebox from the top shelf. Inside was a cassette tape, labeled in my teenage handwriting. No date. No details. Just one word. Proof. I held it in my hands for a long time, heart pounding like I was 16 again, waiting for someone to believe me. But this time, I didn't need belief. I just needed silence. And silence was starting to do its job. The next morning, before I'd even finished the bitter instant coffee I always promised myself I'd stop drinking, Emily was buzzing the intercom downstairs, her voice flat and tight through the speaker like she'd already had the fight in her head and wasn't willing to replay it calmly. I didn't buzz her in immediately. I stood there, my finger hovering above the button, thinking how rare it was for her to come to my place unannounced, and how that alone meant this wasn't just panic anymore, this was escalation. When I finally opened the door, she came in like a gust of air from a house that had been sealed too long, bringing with her the scent of lavender, dryer sheets, and confrontation, clutching her purse like it was a weapon. Like somewhere inside was a list of everything she was ready to accuse me of but didn't quite know how to say yet. She sat on the edge of the couch, not relaxing into it like someone visiting a sibling, but perching there like a negotiator or a reluctant therapist, and when she looked up at me, I could already see the storm gathering behind her blue eyes. The same eyes we both inherited from Janet, though only Emily ever weaponized them with that mixture of pity and urgency our mother had perfected years ago. She didn't waste time. "What happened at brunch?" she asked, her voice lower than usual, like if she spoke too loudly something might break. "She's not sleeping, she's calling me every hour, she's crying, Rachel, crying, and Mom doesn't cry unless something really got under her skin." "What did you say to her?" I let the question hang, not because I didn't have an answer, but because the truth was so damn simple it sounded like a lie. I didn't say anything. Not one word. I didn't defend myself, didn't take the bait, didn't rise to the occasion like I used to, back when I thought being right could fix things. But silence, it turns out, isn't neutral. Silence, when you've lived your life being talked over, dismissed, and labeled, becomes the loudest scream you can make without raising your voice. So I told her exactly that. I didn't say anything, I said, pouring myself another cup of that terrible coffee, and apparently, that's what finally broke her. Emily scoffed, an involuntary sound, halfway between disbelief and frustration, and stood up, walking toward the bookshelf like she needed to move to think, her hand tracing the spines of books she never had time to read, her back to me as she said, "She thinks you're planning something. She said you looked at her like you knew something. Like you remembered." That last word dropped between us like a brick, and I knew then that this wasn't just about brunch, or childhood, or years of bitterness and missed birthdays. This was about that year, the year I dropped out of college, the year Janet told everyone I had a breakdown, the year Emily stopped calling for a while and started pretending that whatever happened had been blown out of proportion. So I said it. Softly, without edge, like I was trying it out on my own tongue. I wasn't crazy, was I? Emily didn't turn around. She didn't move. For a long moment, she stood there like she'd been caught in some invisible net, her whole body still except for the slight trembling of her shoulders. And when she finally did speak, her voice wasn't confident or accusatory, it was hollow. "It was complicated," she said, which, as far as I'm concerned, is what people say when they know the truth is too ugly to name but too real to deny. I crossed the room slowly, standing beside her, not touching her, just waiting. And when she turned to face me, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Guilt. Not the performative kind, not the sighing, burdened kind she sometimes pulled out when she had to explain away Mom's behavior. This was raw. "You were saying things," she whispered, "things that didn't make sense." You were angry all the time, paranoid, lashing out. And Mom said you were imagining things. That she took you to that clinic because she didn't want you to hurt yourself. But I wasn't, I said, and even though my voice was calm, I could feel the old rage crawling up the back of my throat like bile. I wasn't making it up. I was remembering things I'd been told to forget. Emily sat back down, slowly this time, her knees bent like her body had suddenly remembered it was heavy. She said you were obsessed with that night, she murmured. That you wouldn't let it go. That you kept saying something happened in the attic. I told her to throw out the tapes. The journals. Anything that made you spiral. She looked up at me then, and I could see the fear blooming behind her eyes, not fear of me, but fear of what it might mean if I'd been right all along. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I just walked into my bedroom and returned with the cassette tape, the one labeled proof, and held it up, not like a weapon, but like a key. She didn't throw out everything, I said. Some of us kept receipts. Emily didn't touch it. She didn't even ask what was on it. She just stared, her lips pressed into a thin line, and then said, "If you play that, everything changes." And I said, "Good. Let it." That night, I got a call from Sharon, my childhood friend, the one Janet always called a bad influence, the one who remembered things I'd only half believed for years. I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade, but her voice was calm, steady, like she'd been waiting. "Em told me what's going on," she said, skipping small talk. "You really remember, don't you?" "I do," I said. "You gonna say it?" she asked. I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "No. I'm gonna let them say it to themselves." She laughed, but it wasn't cruel. It was the kind of laugh you make when someone finally catches up to the truth. "Damn," she said. "That's cold. I like it." I didn't sleep much that night. I sat on the floor of my apartment with the tape in my hands, the weight of it heavier than it should have been, thinking how silence had finally become my loudest weapon. I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to yell or prove anything. I just had to let the rot breathe a little. And the thing is, once you let something that dark out into the air, it never goes quietly back into the box. There's a moment, quiet and slow, that comes after the spark of a long dormant fire begins to take hold, not the eruption, not the blaze, but that smoldering pause where heat thickens in the air and everyone involved knows something is burning, even if they don't yet see the flames. That was what the next day felt like. There wasn't a dramatic phone call this time, no unexpected knock, just the creeping sensation of things shifting beneath the surface. It started with a voicemail I didn't expect and hadn't asked for, from Janet, voice shaking, not angry like she usually sounded when cornered, but something else, something unfamiliar. "Rachel, please," she said, and the fact that she used my name and not one of her classic dismissive titles like young lady or drama queen was enough to make me play the message twice. "I think we need to talk. Not like last time. This time, just us. Please don't make this worse." There was something in her tone I couldn't place, not quite fear, but close. Something closer to recognition. Like she was suddenly remembering how little control she actually had over the past, and how long she'd relied on the rest of us, on me especially, never having the strength or clarity to look it directly in the face. I didn't call her back. I didn't plan to. I'd done the talking years ago, when no one listened, when my voice was drowned out by pills and whispered conversations behind closed doors about what to do with Rachel. Instead, I went for a walk, one of those long, aimless ones that seem to lead nowhere and still somehow drag you right into the heart of everything you've been avoiding. I didn't take headphones, didn't check my phone, didn't try to distract myself. I just let my mind circle the same 3 or 4 memories that had resurfaced since brunch, the ones I'd buried so deeply they came back in fragments. The attic light flickering, Janet's voice too loud on the phone late at night, Emily crying behind the laundry room door while I listened, not moving, because I knew I wasn't supposed to hear. I remembered the word incident, used over and over in high school, never defined, always whispered like it was a shameful diagnosis no one wanted to write down. When I got home, the first thing I saw was Emily sitting on the stairs outside my building, legs folded neatly beneath her, phone in hand, face red from crying or the heat or both. She looked up at me like I'd taken something from her, and maybe I had. Maybe I'd taken the peace she built by standing so close to our mother's lies that she started mistaking them for her own thoughts. I didn't invite her inside. I sat down next to her on the concrete, and for a long while, neither of us said anything. We just sat, two grown women with matching birthmarks and wildly different childhoods, breathing the same sticky summer air and waiting for the courage to say what needed to be said. "She's coming apart," Emily finally whispered, without looking at me. "I've never seen her like this. She's ripping open old boxes, waking up in the middle of the night, screaming about tapes and notebooks and what they might find." She paused, wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. "She keeps asking if you're talking to anyone. If you've told them." I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, not glanced, not skimmed over, but looked. Looked at my sister, the girl who used to braid my hair when I was too sick to go to school, the woman who had let herself become a reflection of someone else's fear just to stay safe. And then I said the one thing I knew she didn't want to hear. "What are you afraid she'll say, Em?" Her whole body stiffened, like I'd touched a nerve too deep to numb. She didn't speak, just looked down at her hands, and I knew she was replaying the same memories I'd buried for years, the ones that now scratched at the surface of her carefully built denial. "You said you wanted to protect me," I continued, my voice steadier than I expected. "But who are you protecting me from? Me? Or her?" "She said you were hallucinating," Emily murmured. "That you were making up stories, repeating things from movies. You were talking about being watched, about being touched, and I didn't know what to believe. I was just a kid, Rachel. I was scared." "No," I said, gently but firmly. "You weren't just a kid. You were old enough to help her hide things. Old enough to help her throw out my notebooks. Old enough to stand there when I got dragged into a clinic and sedated because I wouldn't stop asking questions." Emily broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, but in that quiet, awful way where someone you love falls apart and you don't feel relief or pity, just exhaustion. She crumpled inward, sobbing into her knees, saying things like, "I'm sorry, and I thought I was helping, and she told me it would ruin everything." I let her cry. I didn't reach for her. I didn't offer comfort. There are some wounds that don't deserve a bandage until they've been bled clean. When the tears slowed, she looked up at me, eyes swollen, and asked, "What's on the tape?" I stood, brushed the dirt off my jeans, and looked down at her. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "But it's her voice. And that's enough." Later that night, I sat in my apartment alone, the tape in my hands again, running my thumb along the edges like it might open up and spill out all the answers I'd been denied for decades. I thought about Sharon and what she'd said. I thought about how much silence it had taken to keep one woman's lies intact. And I thought about the attic. That damn attic. The one room in that house I was never supposed to enter. The one place Janet always kept locked, even when everything else was falling apart. I took a breath and said aloud, to no one but myself, "She's scared because she knows what's coming. And for once, I'm not the one unraveling." And in that moment, I realized something so simple and terrifying I had to laugh. I didn't need to expose Janet. She was doing it herself. It's strange how, after so many years of suppressing something so thoroughly that it starts to feel more like a rumor than a memory, the moment of clarity doesn't arrive like a lightning strike or some cinematic revelation under dramatic music. It arrives in quiet, unsettling stillness, as though the truth has always been there, just waiting for you to stop making noise long enough to hear it breathe. That was the feeling I had the night I finally gave in to the weight of the tape, slid it into the old player I'd kept buried beneath boxes of books and off-season clothes, and sat down with my breath shallow in my chest, afraid not of what I might hear, but of the certainty that it would confirm what I had suspected in silence since I was 17 years old and labeled unstable by the one woman who had the most to lose if I ever stopped doubting myself. The sound was scratchy at first, garbled static and the click of something mechanical being adjusted, and then, like an old ghost emerging from a long-forgotten room, her voice came through, sharp, measured, and far too calm for someone discussing what she was about to admit. At first, I didn't recognize the context. It wasn't a voicemail or a conversation, but a recording of what I quickly realized was a therapy session. Her voice was directed not at me, but at someone behind a desk, someone silent, perhaps nodding, perhaps scribbling notes while Janet, my mother, detailed the state of her household, the difficulties of motherhood, and the unbearable weight of raising a child who, in her words, never felt like mine. I froze as she said it, not out of surprise but out of grim, bitter recognition. With Emily, everything clicked, she said, her voice detached, almost clinical. I looked at her and felt peace. But with Rachel, it was like looking into a mirror I didn't ask for. She cried all the time, even when nothing was wrong. I couldn't soothe her. I didn't want to. My stomach turned, not because I hadn't heard versions of that before, whispers, implications, the constant feeling that I was an obligation and not a child, but because hearing it out loud, unfiltered and without shame. From the woman who spent my entire life insisting I was the one who didn't know how to love, was a kind of brutal confirmation that settled deep into my bones. And then came the part that shifted everything, even for me. There was a moment, Janet continued, her voice suddenly dropping, not with emotion but with conspiracy, when I almost handed her over to Carol. You remember Carol? My sister. She wanted children, she couldn't have any more, and she offered, she said, let me take her. You're miserable, and it's not fair to the baby. There was a pause, and I imagined the therapist sitting there, stunned into silence, perhaps wondering if what she'd just heard was a crime or a confession. I packed a bag, Janet said. I got as far as the front porch. But then Richard came home, and everything changed. Richard. My father. The man who left when I was 6 and never returned. Not physically, not emotionally, not in any way that counted. He was a photograph on the fridge and a phone call at Christmas, nothing more. I had always believed he left because he couldn't handle us, that maybe we had been too much, that I had been too much. But now, hearing her speak his name in that moment, I understood something else entirely. He didn't leave because of what was happening. He left to avoid what was coming. I turned off the tape. I didn't need to hear more. I knew what it meant. My mother had tried to give me away. Not out of mercy, not for my sake, but because she couldn't bear to be reminded of whatever it was inside herself that I pulled to the surface every time I laughed too loud, asked too many questions, or refused to fall in line. And the worst part wasn't even the attempt, it was the fact that she stayed. That she kept me under the same roof, raised me with conditional love, and convinced me for years that my deepest, most instinctive fears were just products of a damaged mind. I called Emily that night. I didn't plan to, I didn't even know what I intended to say, but the words formed in my throat before I could stop them. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight, like she'd been holding her breath since our last conversation. I didn't ask how she was. I didn't apologize for the weight of what was about to come. She was going to give me away, I said, and the line went so silent I thought she'd hung up. When she finally responded, her voice was small, almost childlike. To Carol. I didn't have to ask how she knew. She knew because Janet had told her. Maybe not the whole story, maybe not in those words, but enough for the shape of it to settle in her gut the same way it had settled in mine. She said it was just a thought, Emily whispered. No, I said, the fury in my voice not loud but simmering. She packed a bag. There was another pause, longer this time, and I heard her inhale shakily, as though she were preparing herself for a wave she'd known was coming for years. I didn't know, she said finally. I didn't want to know. That's the problem, Emily, I replied. You didn't want to know anything. You never did. She didn't deny it. She just exhaled, and I could hear the resignation in her voice, the heavy release of a secret she could no longer hold up. So what now? She asked, and I smiled bitterly, because that question, what now, wasn't mine to answer anymore. I left the tape, I said. On her kitchen counter. In a padded envelope. Labeled it, listen. Didn't say anything else. You what? She gasped, panic rising in her voice like I'd just triggered a nuclear meltdown, and maybe I had, because for someone like Janet, The sound of her own voice speaking the one truth she spent her life avoiding was more damning than any accusation from someone else ever could be. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't write a letter. I let her listen, I said. That's all. Emily was quiet for a long time after that, and I could feel the line between us stretching thinner and thinner, like a thread pulled taut between the past and whatever the hell came next. Eventually, she whispered, "You don't know what you've done." But I did. And it wasn't vengeance. It was the release of pressure from a fault line that had been threatening to rupture for decades, and I wasn't the one who caused the quake. I was just the first one to stop pretending it wasn't shaking. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow, tired, aware of the cost. Because the thing about unearthing the past is that it doesn't heal, it haunts. And the people who once denied your version of the story start to look at you differently, not because they've stopped doubting you, but because now they have to live with the fact that they always knew and chose silence anyway. The days that followed the delivery of the tape passed not with the satisfaction of closure or the neat unraveling of a carefully tied knot, but with the slow, suffocating weight of something that had always been buried clawing its way to the surface, not in a dramatic collapse, but in small, disturbing shifts, like the earth cracking quietly before the real quake begins. I didn't hear from Janet. Not directly. There were no calls, no messages, not even the obligatory chain text she used to send every Sunday morning that began with a Bible quote and ended with a veiled jab about responsibility, commitment, or some imagined slight from the past. The silence from her was not only uncharacteristic, it was unnerving, as if by finally hearing the sound of her own voice exposed on that tape, she'd entered a space where denial couldn't survive, and without denial, there was nothing left to prop up the carefully constructed version of herself she'd been selling for decades. Emily, on the other hand, called twice. The first time she hung up after 3 rings, maybe unsure of what to say, or maybe just hoping I'd reach back and rescue her from the mess we were both now standing in up to our necks. The second time, she left a voicemail, her voice hollow, exhausted, and sounding far older than the sister I'd fought with over bathroom time and whose secrets I'd carried on my back through every family gathering. "She hasn't left the house in 3 days," she said, and there was something in her tone I couldn't place, part pity, part fear, and a trace of something like resentment. "She won't eat. She's not sleeping. She just sits in the kitchen and stares at the tape player like it's a bomb she's waiting to detonate." What did you think would happen, Rachel? Did you think she'd apologize? Did you think she'd finally say she was sorry? I didn't call back. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't believe in answers anymore, not the kind that come neatly packaged with apologies and reconciliations and tears that clean instead of stain. What I believed in now was consequence, not revenge, not punishment, just the plain, inevitable weight of cause and effect. For every lie, there is an echo. For every truth withheld, a cost. And, sometimes, the only way to reclaim your sanity is to stop pretending someone else's comfort is more important than your own clarity. One afternoon, I returned to the old neighborhood, not because I wanted to reminisce or indulge some broken nostalgia, but because I needed to see the place that had shaped me with its silence, its shadows, and its relentless gaslighting of everything I knew to be real. The house looked smaller than I remembered, as all haunted places eventually do, like once the fear begins to drain, the walls shrink with it, revealing not power, but weakness. The paint was faded, the lawn unkempt, and the windows, always so pristine when Janet lived there full-time, were now streaked with dust and fingerprints. I walked up the steps slowly, each creak beneath my feet like the echo of an old argument, a slammed door, or the whispered hiss of, "Why can't you just be normal?" The door was unlocked. Of course it was. Janet never believed in locks, said they were for people with something to hide. That irony alone nearly made me laugh as I stepped inside, into the thick, musty air that smelled of lemon cleaner and fear. The house hadn't changed. The same furniture sat stiffly in place, the same framed photos lined the hallway, all edited versions of our family history where everyone smiled too widely and stood just far enough apart not to touch. In the kitchen, on the counter beneath the window, sat the tape player, silent, still open, the cassette no longer inside. I didn't need to ask where it went. I knew. She'd listened to it. More than once, maybe. She'd sat here, probably in the same chair she used to drink her afternoon tea, and let her own voice speak the words she spent her life trying to erase. And now she had no one to argue with, no one to blame, no one to convince that Rachel was the unstable one, the liar, the problem. I didn't call out for her. I didn't check the bedrooms. I simply walked to the back of the house, to the attic door, the one that had always been locked when I was a child, the one that creaked open now with a sound that nearly made my knees give way. The stairs were steep and narrow, the kind built before anyone thought about safety or comfort, and as I climbed, I ran my fingers along the rail, remembering the rough wood, the splinters I used to get when I tried to sneak up here and was scolded. Not for trespassing, but for imagining. "You always had such a dramatic mind," she'd say, and I'd believe her, because how could I not? She was my mother. The attic was empty now, cleared out, the dust thick on the floorboards where old boxes had once sat, maybe full of letters, toys, or other things that had long since vanished. But the space was still heavy with the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, the kind that isn't empty, but too full of everything that was never said. I stood there for a long time, not crying, not shaking, just remembering. And then I whispered, to the empty air, to the walls that had once held my fear, maybe I was the difficult one, because I remembered. The drive back was long, quiet, filled with the kind of thoughts that don't lead to peace, but also no longer spiral into madness. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel healed. I felt like someone who had finally accepted that some wounds don't close, they just stop bleeding. That night, I went to brunch. Alone. Same cafe. Same table, near the window. I ordered coffee, eggs, toast. I smiled at the waitress, who didn't recognize me, and watched the door, half expecting someone to walk in, maybe Emily, maybe Janet, maybe some version of myself I'd left behind. No one came. And that was fine. A week later, I started getting calls. Not many. Just a few. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. An old neighbor who'd heard something. My Aunt Carol, the one who once almost became my mother. Each one asked the same question, in different tones, with varying degrees of curiosity, concern, and veiled accusation. Is it true? I gave the same answer to all of them. I never lied. I was just inconvenient. And that's the part they'll never say aloud, the part they'll never write in their family updates or whisper over holiday pie. That I was never the liar. I was just the one who kept remembering when forgetting would have made their lives easier. The difficult one. The truth teller. The problem. But now? Now I'm the silence that remains after all the lies have been burned away. And I didn't do a damn thing, except stop pretending I didn't remember.